Welcome back to episode or chapter 23 of the Golden Bough, the abridged version. We're going to be looking at our debt to the savage today. And joining us are Ostic from Northern India and Jordan. And we may have a surprise mystery guest. I'm not exactly sure who may show up later on in the stream, but we'll see. So for right now, we're going to start with the trio. It was a short chapter. Not to say that it's not uncomplicated. Um, it offers a little bit of a philosophical reflection upon what so much has we've covered so far in our study of the Golden Bough, and I think there's some philosophical discussions I want to have about it and how it illuminates perhaps how Frazer and Young depart from one another in terms of Frazer perhaps understanding that the rites and rituals appear on the scene in an emergent fashion, and though Young frequently talks like an evolutionist, I think when we look at archetypal theory, which is a big part of what we're doing here, it's hard not to think about what Young is talking about in terms of a creationist or an emanationist perspective. And so we're going to have a little bit of a philosophical dialogue about that. Before we then pivot to my favorite subject, which is looking at the esoteric alchemy of the Apollo missions. And if you've been following along all the other previous installments, none of this will be terribly new. We're just going to layer upon all the things we've been talking about throughout here. I want to pick up and continue our conversation about Dante and the Divine Comedy as it relates to Apollo 1, but then also where we go beyond Apollo 1, specifically in the figure of Beatrice. And we're going to continue to look in a more refined way at some of the symbolism involved in the Mercury program and the Mercury figure archetypally. And I think one of the big revelations that I had putting this presentation together for us this week, it sort of all began by looking at the Trinity test early on in our study of the Golden Bough. And during that time, it seemed to be populated with traces and remnants of a Garden of Eden narrative. And I've joked about this being, my apophenia or, something like that, projection onto it. But I think given that that Garden of Eden narrative is also seemingly showing up in the Apollo missions, one has to ask if they are somehow connected in continuous events, perhaps linked in an archetypal narrative fashion. For instance, one might be telling us a story about the tree of good and evil, knowledge of good and evil, and the other might be telling us a story about the tree of life, because there are two trees in the garden. And finally, I want to broach, though, it will not be an exhaustive exploration. This is going to be something that's going to come up over and over again. I've mentioned this about how there seems to be something about the Philosopher's Stone baked into the Apollo missions. And to understand what the Philosopher's Stone is, we have to look at the different movements of the alchemists to get to that point and relate that back to what Carl Jung has to say about the creation of said stone. So I think those are going to be the topics that we are going to preoccupy ourselves with today. And without further ado, I'll just open up the floor to the other guests.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into it. There's some juicy stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. We're talking about the stories within some of the Christian texts. You've already mentioned those, but also this chapter made me think too about the Pope and just kind of the structure around that and thinking of other examples of where we might still be carrying forward
Sure.
this type of relationship with our leaders. Yeah.
What do you think, Ostic?
I'm mostly excited about what you're going to say because I think we have already covered what it's the Golden Bow section in the previous installment. So I'm excited about what is in store because this is going to be a Luke Johnson extravaganza tonight, I think.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
I slept like 3 hours last night. So
Yeah.
we'll see how complicated, how complex it's going to be. But I hope to deliver. I hope to deliver. So why don't we go to the next slide, if that's okay? And I really enjoyed Frazer's writing here. I don't particularly latch on to Frazer's writing and being like, oh, this guy is just such a masterful writer. But this passage jumped out at me. Um, the chapter primarily uh, primarily defends the savage, what we're calling the savage, these primitive tribes and people from the past that have developed these elaborate systems of rites and rituals and taboos in order to protect their souls and the king's soul to make sure that their civilization is stabilized. And I think maybe not so much for us because we've, I think, been taught to have empathy with these other cultures, but at the time, perhaps that was not the case. It was an opportunity to look down on these individuals and not see the thread of continuity between themselves and us. So, Jordan, would you mind reading this passage to get us going?
Sure. We are like heirs to a fortune which has been handed down for so many ages that the memory of those who built it up is lost, and its possessors, for the time being, regarded as having been an original and unalterable possession of their race since the beginning of the world. But reflection and inquiry should satisfy us that our predecessors we are indebted for much of what we thought most our own, and that their errors were not willful extravagances or the ravings of insanity, but simply hypotheses, justifiable as such at the time when they were produced or propounded, but which a fuller experience has proved to be inadequate. It is only by successive testing of hypotheses and rejection of the false that truth is at last elicited. After all, what we call truth is only the hypothesis which is found to work best. Therefore, in reviewing the opinions and practices of ruder ages and races, we shall do well to look with leniency upon their errors as inevitable slips made in the search for truth, and to give them the benefits that indulgence which we ourselves may one day stand in need of. Cum, yeah, it's Latin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cum, you want to try it? Cum excusatione attaque veteres adiendi sunt. I guess that's right. I don't know.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Well done.
it will do for our purposes. So, um, there's a lot of things that could be said about this passage, um, as poetic as it is. He, he's professing a sort of pragmatist theory of truth, which is interesting, right? That is going to offer a bit of a buffer for us moderns who think that we have some sort of objective scientific apprehension on the nature of reality. So it does offer us a bit of caution for taking us too seriously when we think we have it all figured out. Something that I think that message has been lost on nearly everyone in modernity. And as poetic as it is, something that struck me about it is that uh, uh, one of the things that is posited by these more primitive people is the soul itself, right? So we can say all these different things about the nonsensical nature of the taboos and the rites, and they're all provisional. We eat the chicken, we spit out the bones, whatever the expression is, right? Until we find out what is true for us. But it does raise a very interesting question about whether or not the fundamental misstep in all of this was the creation of the concept of a soul to begin with, right? And that seems problematic when we're looking at Jung, right? Because then it would seem like the collective unconscious is purely an emergent, and all the other aspects of the psyche are purely emergent faculties of our minds, right? That these are just evolving out of lower matter to the more refined state that we examine them today. And that doesn't really seem to be what Jung is saying. Um, and that got me thinking about whether or not it was appropriate to think about Jung in terms of evolutionary terms. I have a slide prepared on that to kind of clarify our thinking about what Jung is doing with his archetypal psychology. But before we do that, I'll get some feedback from the two of you.
I mean, after reading this passage, this is a important passage because we're every day we are bombarded with with this information. I don't think the savages would have had this kind of information explosion during their time. Like they must not have been living in a society where they would be constantly bombarded by the facts from, civilizations from hundreds of years ago, and looking down upon them. I don't think they would have that kind of bias, because we have so much information about the past and how many mistakes were made and how we corrected them. So we have a confirmation bias in our minds that we are, more progressive, we are better than the people that came before us, that we have bigger minds to encompass the reality. So I think that's an important issue to nail down. And I think people should think of themselves, like I try to imagine myself, when I try to imagine myself as a 10th century person, living in a city in a textile working as a textile maker. So I try to imagine these things, that my same mind, because I don't think mind has increased in size. The brain has remained the same size. So that is a kind of a psychedelic thought for me, that with the same faculties, a person was operating fine like thousands of years ago, and here I am. I'm thinking that I am smarter than him, but it's like I'm surrounded by so much technology and convenience that I think this is what I am entitled to, and this is a reflection of myself. But it's like an illusion. You don't understand things unless you do them. You can sit from outside and like comment on things, but like real knowledge comes from doing things, from trying out everything. So I think that that idea.
It raises a very interesting question. I hadn't even taken into consideration what the exposure to so much information actually does to our psyches. It's worth thinking about as we go along in our study here, right? But are we any more internally consistent in our rites and rituals in modernity than our ancestors were? Because it seems like to me, just like if you do like these man on the street interviews or whatnot, like despite the exposure to all this information, people have the most convoluted schizophrenic belief systems that don't really seem to um, comport with one another, right? Like they hold these diametrical views that openly um, contradict other positions that they may have. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is we may not have progressed, and the exposure to information might actually be scrambling our minds in some way.
Yeah, sure. That's the case, because it's like it's again, it's an illusion of progress, and illusion of, if you think you have books on your shelf, you try to think of yourself, oh, I'm a smart person, I read a lot, so much. But it's like it's not always the case. Sometimes people who actually do the things, they understand better. Like if I talk about wrestling from outside, I may read books about it, but unless I go into the ring and you feel the force of other person hitting me, or things like that, that reveals another layer that text cannot capture, words cannot capture that. So it's like we are kind of sent into a matrix by the language itself, because language keeps us in a place that, okay, we have some safe distance, but we're not actually in there. So, you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I read yesterday that one of my friend posted about it. She said that most of the things in life cannot be taught through words. So it's like you have to be there, you have to see it. It's like people talk about, father figures in the same way, that your fathers they don't teach you anything sometimes. They don't talk to you, but then you see them and then you learn. Okay, this is how it's done. So if you see him, fixing a car, or doing things like that. If you see him working out, so you learn and imbibe and try to copy them in some way. They don't have to put words to it and tell you. I'm just talking about that our minds are more attuned to what we see and what we do. But with all this language, all this information, it's giving us an illusion that we actually know these things, but we don't, you know?
Right.
Mhm.
Well, and to that point, I would think that you've kind of, in a way, made the case for the priority of studying alchemy and the picture language that's associated with it, right? Because in our study of this, how much deep truth has been communicated to us by just poring over some of these transcripts and these old texts. And we're going to get deeper into it today. I mean, it really is unlocking a lot of hidden knowledge just to understand the symbols, just to understand the pictures. Jordan, would you like to say anything before we move on?
Wow, yeah. I mean, I loved everything you both already said. This could be a whole presentation and a whole
Yeah, it should.
topic,
Yeah.
or like even a really great Socratic experience to go into this subject. I loved, Austin, what you said about the differentiation between knowledge and perhaps even wisdom over time that knowledge can grow into versus information, and how they are distinct things. And that's probably the biggest challenge for humans today, to really understand, okay, where is information aiding the expansion of my consciousness, or even aiding me in my physical experience? It could be tangible, very practical, three-dimensional matters, and the information could be really valuable, or it could just be overwhelming or put us in the sympathetic nervous state and really knock us out of our ability to actually process anything truly with the head brain. I also loved this idea of there's limitations on how much the head brain on its own can truly process. And Luke, maybe you'll get into this, but even I think you were talking about Mercury doesn't necessarily go to the pleroma itself. He doesn't go to heaven itself, and I could be off track, but I know we were talking about how the minds can go to all of these different realms, but there are still limitations on how far up like logic can really take one. And it is this really weird journey of, it does seemingly require a lot of logic and understanding how that part works to get to a certain level, and then to keep going in the ascension process you kind of have to let it go in a way, or at least learn how to integrate it. It's
Yeah.
probably,
Yeah.
alchemy, really, to me it's all about this integration.
It
And
is
then
about the integration, yeah. And just to
Mhm.
just to clarify a point, it was just the psychopomp archetype in general as it relates to Virgil in
Oh yes, it was
the
not
Inferno.
Mercury.
You're right.
Yes. Thank you. I knew I was off base somewhere there, because I was like, I think Mercury went to the heavens and he's like the
Right.
messenger. So yes,
Well,
it was
that's
Virgil.
yeah. Just because Virgil is associated with Apollinian thought in
Right.
that tradition.
Right. But anyway, the point in my personal experience stands that we can only go so far with it, but also, is it even possible to go through the full ascension process without the logic brain at all? I think not. Like, at least not in this human experience. It seems very valuable and very important. And I also wanted to bring up Michael Hoffman. Mr. Hoffman was so nice to respond to your email, Luke,
Mm,
asking to kind of clarify and crystallize the revelation of the method, concept, theory. I'm not sure what tag to put on it. And he writes about this extensively, but he put it really succinctly for you in an excellent way and reminded me, revelation of the method has two sides to it. So in some, the revelation of the method is this concept, this idea that all this information is coming out. There's revelations happening constantly. And Ostic, like you said, every time you pick up a phone, there's a million things like you can tap into and read about and learn about. You can know about traumas happening on the other side of the world. You could know about good things too, but that tends to be the bias. And this has two potential functions. On one hand, it can really take people out. It can overwhelm the nervous system. It can make it so that people can't really progress anymore. They're apathetic. They give up. They stop taking action. They become disconnected from source. They're unintegrated. On the other hand, as we're all studying these symbols together through this process, it seems to be pushing us further on this evolutionary path. And that's something Michael Hoffman talks about. He says that the cryptocracy, in his words, are betting that that's not going to be the outcome of this info dumping, of this revelation of the method at work. However, whether it's things that they're, we're always talking about the multi layers that these symbols are playing out on, and is it God, et cetera. And, we talk about that tons of length, but it does seem to be breeding like a new type of human who's able to see these symbols and integrate them into their own being. So, Luke, that's
right.
probably longer than you wanted on this slide, but
No, it's great. I'm just yeah, 22 more slides. But so let's go to the next one. And I'm not trying to marginalize anything you said. I mean, we really could just talk about each slide for a long period of time. So I've alluded to this already, but the way that Frazer's model is working, right, is that the mind, seemingly, what he seems to be advocating for is that the mind is evolving from magic to religion to science, and that there's this common telos to everything in terms of primitive people inventing myth. Not that there is some sort of divine scheme here. This is just how the interaction of matter and consciousness goes. Unlike what Jung's model is in terms of the archetypes expressing themselves through magic, through religion, and through science, right? Um, Perhaps a way to think about it would be um, kind of like a riverbed that has like contours and things like that built into it. And regardless of what's running through it, you know, uh, freshwater, salt water, whatever else, like the same indentations, the same qualities are going to show up in that body of water. Um, and if we can go to the next slide, Jordan. Uh, um, I guess in general, what Fraser is talking about seems to be hitch and wagon with a Darwinian understanding that things are going from bottom up, unlike Jung's, which is going top down. Um, and the way that Fraser talks about things, it's generally sort of linear and historical, whereas the way Jung talks about these things is that it's cyclical, and these things are. That's why we're going to see the same archetypes, the same narratives come back around over and over again. Perhaps, like I mentioned in the opening, the Trinity test and the Apollo moon missions are separate events, and that they're on their own cycle of, like, let's say that we can firmly establish that the Garden of Eden narrative is going on in both of them. Um, One might be able to, it might be the case that this is going on in all the world historical events, but that's a larger theory that I'm working on. Um, we've talked a good deal about this, so I think we can kind of move to the next topic. What do we have here? Okay, so we're getting into the Divine Comedy bit. So let me check my notes on that. Last time, as Jordan mentioned in um, the first section, she mentioned a point that I had made, that it was just incredibly uncanny that Virgil Gus Grissom uh, died in the Inferno fire during Apollo 1 and was not able to go to the moon. Right. And I had forgotten this, that in the Divine Comedy, Virgil does not join Dante in the moon. He actually meets Beatrice there. Beatrice is his guide in the moon. So it kind of got me thinking, like, okay, like if this narrative is in place, who is Beatrice in all of this? And I did a little bit of digging. I'm not sure there's like a great answer for this, but like Beatrice is really kind of an extension of the Virgin Mary. I believe the Virgin Mary has sent Beatrice to guide Dante to the lunar realm, right? And so I think in some way, I'm not prepared to like, I'm not going to die on this hill, but in some way, I think you could start to see the moon itself kind of being the Beatrice Virgin Mary Great Mother archetype kind of condensed into one. And that's how this narrative, if it truly is in play, the 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 Divine Comedy, which really I think is more like a what Jung would call it a mythologem, and we'll get into this conversation about the distinction between a mythologem and an archetype. Um, Something else that I looked into that I thought was really fascinating when applying the Divine Comedy to the Apollo missions is that there, there that first celestial sphere in the heaven is the moon, and there are actually souls there. Okay, and these are celestial souls. These are heavenly souls, right? So that got me thinking about, obviously, the men who walk on the moon. Now, the nature of the souls of those that dwell on the moon is different from those who live in even higher celestial realms. The ones there were good and virtuous people. The only problem that prevents them from progressing beyond that sphere is that they were coerced into doing something they didn't want to do. So there's like nuns there and priests there and things like that that were coerced and like broke their vows to the church and God, right? And they did that under duress rather than dying a martyr of some sort. And that got me thinking, like, if this is really in play and it's informative at all, there's a lot of people that who don't believe that the Apollo missions are real, that these Apollo astronauts were actually coerced to do that. And perhaps that's a way of thinking about these being good and noble men who kind of fell on the sword or did something for the country that they felt was noble, and that they still have an elevated place in the heavens and are still rightly deserving of our respect. But there's a lesson there about how important it is to keep your vows. So I thought that was interesting. I've got some more here, but I'll let you two respond to that.
I mean, pretty crazy.
What do
I
you
don't know.
think?
There's a lot. I feel like I need to go reread so much. If only I knew how exciting Dante's Inferno was when I was in high school. I mean, it is like super crazy, but I don't think I really understood how important it is.
Yeah, it just helps us unlock so many other things. I mean, this gets into
Mhm.
an interesting question about why study great literature, right? Like, had I not, I've not read it physically with my eyes. I listened to the Divine Comedy, I don't know, like 6 or 7 years ago. And largely because I know that these things are going to come up. It's like seemingly part of the architecture of our matrix. So, I've read Moby Dick, I've read Paradise Lost and things like that. Like, because I know it's going to come in handy at some point. So it raises an interesting question about like what is the point of reading?
Yeah,
Like
I mean, it's
why familiarize yourself with the canon?
right. I mean, it's a technology to initiate you into,
Maybe so.
like you said, the building blocks of the symbolic matrix,
Yeah.
which might
Exactly.
be which might be just as important as the physical grid and the physical matrix.
Well, I think the case could be made that these individuals, be it Dante or Milton or Melville, are deeply inspired artists. And kind of from what I understand, about visionary art from what Jung is saying is that these individuals have the collective unconscious like pouring through them, that they kind of become vessels, and their art is like inspired in a way that the carefully calculated plastic art is not. And
Mhm.
so it offers as like a type of disclosure for the architecture of our reality. So that is, have you ever heard someone make the argument for this is why you need to read Moby Dick, because the collective unconscious is pouring through this man, and it'll help you unlock the fabric of reality, or tear open the fabric of reality.
Never in that way. I mean, it was definitely positioned. I was very blessed with the education I had, and it was pitched to me as, importance to understand society, etc. But there is, I think, this weird schizophrenic denial of where it's currently playing out. It's always in this retrospective, kind of safe way of applying it. Oh, this great literature is this, and then that influenced this piece of art, and then that influenced this piece of art. No one is really talking about what you're saying in this is the collective unconsciousness, like pouring through real events, not just fictional events. The lines between real and imaginal are very thin
There you
in my
go.
mind,
There you
and
go.
that's probably the difference, being in an English IB class where it's being taught, and then also, like, there's this lack of applying it even, I think, to current art, but I think that might be more of a reflection of how diluted just the culture is right now, at least in the Western world, at least where I am. Like, most people are not reading anything at all, so that's very frightening.
Hmm. Ostic, what do you think?
I mean, first of all, I thought this was a very beautiful imagery that he's drawn upon, and
Mhm.
it's exciting. And I think I agree with you with the thing, the whole collective unconsciousness pouring out of an artist who is deeply connected with his, with his emotions, with the world, with the history, with all the visionary artists that came before him. People, they transmit these ideas, and I think these visions, they endure because they connect with us at a deep level. That is why they keep popping up everywhere. I don't think it's a very
Right.
plastic thing that they're planning it, they're doing it out of obligations. I think it's deeply primal, and this is what human psyche responds to. And like when I used to think about, oh, I should become a writer, like back when I was a teenager. But then I thought like I should study books of rhetoric. Okay, I should buy this. I should keep a thesaurus with me. I should, things like that. But then I realized that, to be a writer, you need to have an unfiltered kind of, pouring out of your emotions and unconscious right on the page. I figured this out like what last year. Before that, I was
Mhm.
against all of this. You should be. I was thinking about all these rules. Okay, how do you know but now I'm very pro about all these visionary artistic things that people talk about. They're not able to articulate it well, so it feels like very, pseudosciency when they talk about it. All the other artists, oh, I was inspired by this. They make it sound so simple, but it's deep. Like the longer you live, the longer you absorb your reality, and the longer you're connected with the world in a way that is attuned to your emotions, and you're not getting carried away by your baser instincts to maybe things like that. You know what I'm talking about? Like your dreams are
Oh,
very,
yeah, totally.
they have some clarity. Your dreams have a clarity within them, so that helps. And I think people back in the day actually had a greater time to, exercise their imaginations, because what else would they do? They had a lot of time on their hands, and they did not have
Yeah, this gets
distractions.
into
So it's
this
like, it's
this
a,
gets into the point you made about being bombarded with information in modernity. Like, did a more contemplative, slower life, one where you could lock yourself away in a room, like, allow for you to become a vessel of the collective unconscious in a way that we cannot really experience now. Like, think about, like, I really enjoy the access to information that I have. I'm able to do this mythopoetic mapping, right? We really need to have those shirts made, by the way. Um, but as I'm doing it, I'm like, I'm checking ESPN scores, like I'm staying on top of like world events, et cetera, et cetera. Like, how stultifying and disruptive is that to perhaps a cosmic force that is trying to break through?
yeah, sure.
Yes, this is why I think a meditation practice is so important because most of us, and I've been very guilty of this, wall to wall, waking up to going to bed,
Yeah,
are just pushing stuff into our brain and our eyeballs, and we're not providing ourselves any opportunity to integrate it. And
that's
that
right.
can cause all sorts of issues. So, I mean, I could talk all day about why meditating is important, but something else I want to get in here. Luke did a fabulous presentation. I forget if you did it with, I think you did it with Sean Kelly, maybe. Uh, Correct me in a moment, where you go into Faust, the part one and part two, and really talking about Jung's different, how he explains the different types of artistic creation. One is what we're describing here. It's the like streaming the collective
Yeah,
unconscious, or perhaps some people would say even the divine in some cases, and contrasting it with the more tactical, the tactician who's masterful in the skill, is executing like Ostick described, really well versed on the trade, on the techniques, and executes it that way. So we do see examples of both types of works. And again, the alchemical journey is all about integration. Something I learned as a dancer is you have to master ballet to be able to then break the rules. So I do think there's a time and place, right, to be very skilled in what you do, and then really holding that space to be able to bring through the divine inspiration.
yeah.
They can come together. But there's also incredible artists who have no training, who don't do any of that, but they are so inspired and they're such excellent uh, channelers that they're able to bring really powerful things through them.
Yeah, I did that talk on visionary art. From it's an essay from one of Jung's books called The Spirit Man, Art and Literature, or something like that. And I did that on Aeon Byte, I think last
Oh,
fall.
that's right. That is where
Yeah.
you did that presentation. So people can go
Yeah.
find that on Aeon
Yeah.
Byte. I thought it was a
Yeah.
really interesting talk. Miguel is such a great host. So if you're interested in that topic. That
That
would be
was
a
cool.
great
Yeah,
yeah.
that was a pivotal that essay was pretty pivotal for me to shift kind of my understanding of what I thought was happening here. Why don't we go to the next slide? Because we're going to be with this Garden of Eden conversation for a while. So I mentioned in the opening how uh, there might be reason to think that there's something continuous between the Trinity test and Apollo, symbolically, archetypally, mythologically. Um, and the reason why I revisited this, because I was a little bit insecure about it, but then I remembered, I found this old article that I had sent myself in my email about how the Apollo astronauts actually practiced the moon landing at the Nevada nuclear testing site. And it looks just like the moon, right? In terms of all these different bombed out craters and whatnot. And these were warheads and things like that left over um, and innovated in the 50s or whatever. And it's so surreal, right? Because you have this, you could talk about there being some organizational links, right? Like if you were to go through and create a list of like the things that we've done in America that reach this level of discipline, national effort, financing, et cetera. It's a very short list, right? You, the Trinity, the Manhattan Project, and the Apollo program, I think, are at the top of that list. Maybe you could say something about the Human Genome Project. Maybe you could say something about the response to COVID, and a handful of other things. But the fact that this is linked together, this exploration, they took them out there to practice. You can see here the moon buggy, which we talked about last time, as being potentially connected to the gold bug, the gold beetle. Got me thinking about this, and in a way, the narrative of the Garden of Eden doesn't have to end with each event. One can be this dissolution of matter, this splitting of the atom, right? This blackening Negredo experience, as we've talked about from an alchemical perspective, and there definitely seems something to be highly alchemical going on there with the Trinity test. But it's like a fall, right? Even in the Oppenheimer movie and the historical record, it has the fall baked into it, right? Like it's this rumor that I guess was like substantiated by the film that Oppenheimer tried to poison his professor, his tutor. I think it might have been Niels Bohr, even with a poison apple, right? And there's something very Promethean about the Oppenheimer figure. In fact, Kai Bird, the guy who wrote the book that the movie is based on, his book's called American Prometheus, right? Which Prometheus clearly has overtones to Lucifer and the apple and getting Adam and Eve to fall, right? And so we could see that potentially that there needed to the collective unconscious, all of us who participate in this collective dream need, needed some sort of compensatory effort to overcome this transgression that we had all participated in, even though we weren't alive, right? Like our ancestors, this guilt that is sort of passed down, right? This karmic guilt that is passed down. And that in a way, like Apollo is an attempt to restore the paradise that was potentially disrupted by the invention of of atomic weapons. So I think that I've talked about this before. We don't need to belabor the point because there's so much to cover today. That's just one example. Like I've talked about the poison apple that Oppenheimer supposedly gave to his tutor, but you can see that this theme is going to get continued on to the Apollo missions. I'm going to talk about Neil Armstrong as the first man, as being kind of an Adamic archetype, right? And perhaps the innocent archetype, but we'll get into that in a little bit. So I don't need to belabor the point. What do you guys want to say about this?
That makes me think of what's the significance of First Lady? Why do we call her that?
Right. Of course. It doesn't perfectly map. I'm still figuring this all out. Like, we'll take a look at it because the Oppenheimer movie came out I think on the same day as Barbie. It was the Barbieheimer phenomenon, right? In that entire time, I could see the archetypal symbolism in both films, and I did these like schizo like story posts on my Instagram or whatever, and then I deleted them because I looked too insane. But now I don't care. I'm going to try to bring a little bit of that back in here. I think in the next slide. that one is some of the other examples talking about how there's continuity between uh Trinity and Apollo, but um I think we can skip that and go to maybe 466. Just and I mentioned this, and I want to get Ostic's take on this here in a second, because I didn't give him a chance to talk about the slide 464. But something I do want to bring our attention to, I strive for clarity in the terminology that we use here, and I'm teaching myself young as we go. Like, so I may know a little bit more than some of the individuals that are watching this. There are individuals who are watching this that know a lot more than me. And something that kind of keeps coming up in my research is this almost interchangeable use of the word mythologem and archetype. And then I guess what I want to say here is that the mythologem is kind of like the expression of an underlying archetype, right? So when we talk about the Garden of Eden, underlying all of that might be something about totality or the paradise or something like that. It has a bunch of different names, right? Similarly, we might talk about the serpent in the Garden of Eden. There's not really, you know, a serpent archetype as much as a mythologem of, say, the shadow archetype or the trickster. So I just wanted to draw that clarification there, and then we can go on to the next
Would
slide
you
if
mind
you.
defining mythologem for everyone?
Well, I think I did. I mean, I hope I
Okay.
did, right? It's the expression of the underlying archetype. The
Mhm.
archetype is behind the expression. So the Garden of Eden would say be a mythologem of, I guess, what we would call a paradise archetype, or the serpent is an expression, just one expression of the trickster archetype potentially, or the shadow archetype. Though there are many different. So trickster is the archetype that is behind the expression or the mythologem of a variety of different tricksters. We're going to talk about monkeys again today as tricksters. We've looked at rabbits as tricksters. So they are the mythologem. This is my understanding. Okay. I could be wrong. They are the expression of the archetype.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. And Asik, do you want to say something so far about this connection between the Garden of Eden and Trinity and Apollo, or do you want me to go ahead and do this slide?
Just one point I wanted to make.
Sure.
I mean, that fall thing is pretty interesting. I mean, I was thinking about why would they, hold those simulations on nuclear test sites. So one thing I thought, like, the cover story could be, oh, we're doing this because moon has radiation on it because it has no atmosphere, so it's a good place to test our suits. And the other story is also that it's so isolated. I mean, if you're gonna it's an isolated place, so it's a good place to have these simulations. So I was thinking about the logistics of it, and I think, yeah, that's a good place to stage things. So other
Yeah.
so it's like it looks like
Everybody else
that.
would be too
And
afraid to go there.
no,
Yeah.
no, I'm not too afraid. I mean, we have already crossed many lines, so I'm like, why not?
Oh, what I mean is, you're not going to have a lot of people who are like, "Oh yeah, let's go on the nuclear weapons testing site," because they'd be concerned about radioactivity or getting annihilated or something like that if they thought it was active.
Yeah. Other things about, you brought out the fall. So for the past 3 days, I had been, I just began reading Finnegan's Wake and, checking all the
Oh
Wikipedia entries. So it's about,
yeah,
this fall narrative. It's woven into that whole book, so it's
of course.
interesting. Yeah. I think it could
I don't know
come
if you're
in
aware
later.
of this, but uh, Joseph Campbell, before he really became Joseph Campbell, his first major contribution was a skeleton key to Finnegan's Wake, and you may find that helpful as you're trying to get through it. To me personally, I was just so interested in like consuming it. Like I said, I don't really enjoy literature like I should, because I'm just like, I need to get this into my brain so I basically have an understanding of what this is about so I can interpret the matrix code, right? So it's a different experience when you're just like poring over Finnegan's Wake in a meaningful kind of way. So you may enjoy that, or if someone else is listening, they may enjoy that text.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
I
it's
commend you. That is
it's connected to what we're discussing here, so that is why I
It
thought
is.
I should bring it up. I mean, all the themes, the mythology, mythology is so much woven into that text. It's unreal. I mean, it's Kubrick level, layering. So it's interesting.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, James Joyce is crazy. I mean, and he's part of this whole puzzle in some way.
Mhm.
Clearly, I mean, look, he wrote a book called Ulysses, right? So Ulysses is the Latin version of Odyssey or Odysseus. I'm sorry, Odysseus. So, and clearly, Homer's The Odyssey is a big part of this. Last time we talked about Apollo 13, and the command module was called Odyssey. So, yeah, I haven't brought Ulysses into this conversation. I need to, maybe I'll make a note of that. And I'll try to think about the James Joyce angle and all of this. Um,
I mean, you talked about giants, giants in Genesis.
yeah,
The book
yeah,
also has all these buried giants, the fallen giants, and they talk about like Dublin is built upon a buried giant, and we talk about body politic. It's like the whole map of Dublin is mapped all over the body of a person who's dormant, and it's like he's dead, then Finnegan's is dead, and he's being roused awake through life around
right.
him. Drinks.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
very good
yeah.
good imagery.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's great. Um, so I mentioned Barbieheimer earlier, and I was like, oh, this seems. I think at the time I was like, oh, this is like studios are like doing this. Like, there's a conspiratorial angle to it. Now, I mean, given what we've talked about in terms of visionary art, it's just I think these things just happen. I'm not even really sure the directors understand what they're doing. I actually don't think they do most of the time. Like, um, but what was interesting about the unification of these films coming out at the same time, if Oppenheimer is a story about the fall, Barbie is a story about the fall in a different kind of way, right? It's Ken and Barbie are Adam and Eve leaving the Garden of Eden to experience the air quotes real world, right? They're getting out of like the fake plastic world to experience the real one. And what I found that was so interesting about this, and I noticed it at the time, is that about not I think around the same time, maybe shortly thereafter or just before, is that Ryan Gosling played Neil Armstrong in First Man, right? So it's like, okay, like these symbols are descending upon this actor. We've talked about this before, how like certain actors seem to have alchemy and archetypal symbolism that follows them around. And I think in a weird kind of like collective dream logic, I guess I kind of was like, okay, you know what? I think this is making the case to me that like Neil Armstrong is Adam. And what's interesting, when he takes his moonwalk, that's the first extravehicular activity or EVA. So when he does one small step for man, that is the first EVA on the moon. So you get kind of Adam and Eve mixed together. And then you think about this, like the expression, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, whatever it is, right? It One thing that he is doing is affecting the destiny of everyone else. That's just like Adam, right? Because when Adam takes that one small bite, right, that causes this fall for the entire reality for everyone else. So it seems to me that there's some parallelism there with those two statements. And maybe you think I'm reaching, even where they land, right? They land in the Sea of Tranquility. Okay. And I got to thinking about that. I was like, Sea of Tranquility, that sounds just like the Garden of Eden. Like, I mean, except that one's a garden and another's a sea. But then if you get into it, like gardens, because of their generative and productive qualities, right, are associated with mothers, right? Like Mother Nature, right? And seas are also associated with, say, mother figures, right? Mares or Marias, right? Like these oceans that they're landing on. So it seems like that is in play as well. And we talked about during Apollo 11 when they landed the Eagle, they landed it right next to Double Crater, and it was like, oh, okay, this is obvious, Double Eagle, right? And then Buzz brought the double eagle Masonic flag up there, and we were able to understand that that double eagle is another permutation of the divine hermaphrodite. And that was a big revelation, right? Well, what else is the divine hermaphrodite? Well, if you go into esoteric and rabbinic traditions, not necessarily the Bible, but the commentaries, okay, they speak about Adam and Eve as being a hermaphroditic kind of superorganism that was split in two, right? So the double eagle, the divine hermaphrodite, that's these alchemical symbols that are guarding it, are really calling back to the Garden of Eden narrative. And I mean, the Garden of Eden references really just kind of add up. I even included this um, quote from the Bible, 1 Corinthians, was it 15:47? The first man is of earth, earthy. Is that what it says? I don't know. The second man is the Lord from heaven. So we've got this Adam on earth, and we're going to get this other Adam in heaven. And I think there is something to that. Now, Jung, from what I understand, and I need to go through it with a fine tooth comb, wrote pretty extensively about the Garden of Eden as a mythologium in Mysterium Conjunctionis, which I've just started. Okay, I'm like 40 pages into it. It's like 750 pages. It's gonna be a while. I may finish it before the end of the year. And you can see some of the topics that he tackles there. Adam as the arcane substance, the statue Adam as the first adept, the polarity of Adam. And it gets super crazy. I just finished up Aeon. We have these quaternities where um, there's like higher and lower aspects. I do not understand them yet. I'm going to introduce them here in a slide. But I think the way that my general understanding of how Jung understands the fall is not necessarily like this bad thing. It's not like this like condemning thing that like doomed all of humanity. It actually like sets in motion the cycle of individuation. Like it creates like this separateness, and ultimately sets in motion the evolution of consciousness. Hence why we may actually want to try to get back to the moon, to get back to some sort of paradisical place. And that is a subject. These are really heady subjects, but I mean, I'm just kind of giving a taste of them here. And I don't know, maybe to just tie this up, and I'll let you guys talk about it. The way that Barbie starts off, right? Um, it's so strange the way that Barbie starts off. Like there is so much esoteric symbolism because it's clearly um, saying something pretty profound. I think what's her name, Greta Gerwig or whatever. She's like, oh yeah, I just was a big 2001: Space Odyssey fan. I don't even know she understands fully the symbolism that's involved in the beginning of that film. And similarly, like when I'm not. I don't know if Nolan or any of these individuals that write about Oppenheimer really understand what's coming through onto the screen when they do this stuff. I'm not saying they don't have talent and that they don't intentionally do it sometimes. I don't think they get it all the time. And something with a mind, a life of its own is depositing things there for them, as it does with all these different conspiracy topics too. All right, that's all I have to say.
That was
I have
a
I
good
have to take a
presentation.
you talk. I got to take a phone call real quick.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the cover story that Kubrick tells the audience, he told a Japanese reporter like what's happening in 2001, and he said that at the end of the 2001, Dave Bowman was placed in a zoo that was created by aliens to watch over him, and so by extension, that monolith itself is supposed to come from aliens. And now, if I think Luke is talking about how the symbolism of Barbie being brought on the earth by aliens, and it's also an inversion of the whole Adam and Eve story, that like at first God created Adam and then from his rib Eve was created, but here it's like Barbie is the one that came first, and from for her image Ken was created to cater to her needs. He also talks about like, I'm only created for you. I'm here to love you and things like that. So it's like an inversion of that narrative as well. Then like all the things is it's pretty interesting. And I really like the idea that fall, it is not supposed to be a condemnation. It's supposed to, helps us individuate ourselves. So that idea, it resonated with me.
Yeah, I love that reframe because, like, it's easy to be like, oh no, we're so horrible. Which, true or not, is probably not a helpful story to be telling ourselves if we're going to come out of this process and truly kind of blossom. Um, Everything good, Luke?
Yeah, my slides went down, so you
Oh,
uh, my
yeah, take
computer
your
and
time.
we I might need to pause because my computer is
Okay, I'll come take a
spiraling.
look.
Yeah.
Yep. Sure. So this is from Aeon. The serpent in Genesis is an illustration of the personified tree Newman. Hence, it is traditionally represented in or coiled round the tree. It is the tree's voice which persuades Eve, in Luther's version, that, quote, it would be good to eat of the tree, and pleasant to behold that it is a lusty tree, end quote. In the fairy tale of the spirit in the bottle, Mercurius can likewise be interpreted as a tree Newman. In the Ripley scroll, Mercurius appears as a snake in the shape of Melusina, descending from the top of the philosophical tree, the tree of knowledge. The tree stands for the development and phases of the transformation process, and its fruits or flowers signify the consummation of the work. In the fairy tale, Mercurius is hidden in the roots of a great oak tree, i.e., in the earth, for it is the interior of the earth that the mercurial serpent dwells.
Yeah, I think that'll be fine. I mean, there was more that I was going to have there, but I think the point that I wanted to make is and perhaps it's obvious. We've looked at these two logos that NASA has presented us. This is nearly the original, the meatball logo, right? Which I've claimed that the Ouroboros is connected to Mercurius in the reconciliation of the opposites, right? The tension of the opposites. But then we also, after the meatball logo, we have what's known as the worm logo here, the red lettering against the white background. And we've talked about this to a certain degree about how the serpent, and I think a lot of people like in conspiratorial circles will be like, oh, see, this is like they're the serpent and they're lying because the serpent tells lies, right? And that may be true on a level, right? But the Mercurius figure here that is connected to the serpent also offers us this invitation to undergo the transformation. And what I thought was interesting about the way that Jung phrased it here in Aeon, that the serpent is essentially like a tree Newman, called to mind some of these portrayals of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, kind of being an extension of the tree itself, not this separate sort of entity, kind of like a way that it is the tree itself does the talking. And so when we see the serpentine imagery in the logos and elsewhere, when I found some other serpents that I want to talk about here today, it it kind of, knowing what we know about the symbolism that Jung is pointing out here, it is an extension of the Edenic trees. Now, perhaps I used a lot of words to describe something that could have been said very simply, but that just adds a nice little that adds a nice little layer to it, I think. And we've talked a great when we've talked about Jack and the Beanstalk and the tree to heaven, of course, right? Like this is about the integration of the opposites and what it requires to confront the shadow in order to grow into heaven.
Yeah, there's so much here. What pops in my head, speaking of conspiracy world, is the inner earth, uh, you
Oh yeah,
know, archetype mythogem. I'm saying it wrong, but that comes
mythology.
mythologem.
Yeah.
Yeah, the inner earth. That feels like a mythologem, perhaps, for something deeper that's going on with Mercury here in the root. And earlier you were talking about the separation of the feminine and the masculine aspects from a previously unified. And that, of
Yeah.
course, spills out into more new agey thoughts around twin flames. Of course, I all different
Yes.
types of levels of consciousness, if you will, interpreting or picking up on, I think rightly so, these different themes, but then filtering it through whatever lens we are throughout this ascension journey. And I am part of that as well. I'm not sitting here thinking like, oh, I have this like omnipotent outside active.
Mhm.
No, but it's interesting how those things play out.
What do you think, Ostic?
I think Christians should be speaking on this. I don't think I'm very uh, in a position to talk about it, so I'll refrain from this one.
Oh, I think, I mean, for the record, I think you don't have to be a Christian to have an opinion about the symbolism that's involved in the Garden of Eden. Like, you know, what we're doing right now is not a Bible study, right? And nothing that I'm communicating here, I recommend that anybody build their I'm not trying to advocate some sort of archetypal Christian perspective, although I may end up at that. You know, I've looked ahead at where a lot of this thinking goes by looking at what Jung says in Answer to Job. When we look at the alchemy of being a subscriber to a panentheistic understanding of God in this way, and it does make God in some way dependent upon the consciousness of man, which is not an idea that I'm going to be advocating. But I think so far as we're, just looking at what Jung has to say and applying it to this word historical event of the Apollo missions, I think it's perfectly fine for you to weigh in on it. You're not recommending dogma or doctrine to
Yeah, these things
anybody,
are way
you know?
bigger than Christianity. And for
Yeah.
the record, like I wouldn't tell someone I'm a Christian probably because I don't fit in that box. I'm just me and that's it. And this beautiful archetypal imagery based language is everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean,
There's
But
probably
I
there's
wouldn't
probably
I don't
many stories in your culture, Ostic, that kind of mirror exactly what we're saying. This union of the divine and the feminine, the serpent, the earth, and the heavenly realms, and how, I mean, even the spiral of the DNA, many people have pointed out, is a bit like the union of those aspects. So
yeah, that's sure, but I think I'm I'll be setting this slide out. You guys will,
no worries. Well,
yeah.
that's fine too.
it is part of our culture, right? Like I wouldn't be able to like riff too much on, say, the foundational myths of Hinduism unless I had done some serious advanced study. Uh, but I mean, we're going to keep talking about the Garden of Eden. I want to talk about snakes on the moon. So let's go to
Snakes on a
469.
plane, snakes on the moon.
Snakes, snakes on the moon. Um, okay. So, I've gone snake hunting and I remembered, and I couldn't remember where it was. Like where they were talking about like, oh, turning over like moon rocks. Like, yo, you do that down in Texas, you might get a rattlesnake or something like that. So one of the astronauts says that. And I was like, where is that from? And during Apollo 10, they they were navigating and noticed these two features that were very serpentine in nature. These lava rivers. I have the exact name for them. I believe they're called like sinuous riles or something like that. And one was called Sinuous Ryle Sidewinder, and then another was called Diamondback. And this was informal. I don't believe they actually. I have to go and check this. So fact check me on this. I don't think they like officially recognize these, if they did at all, until July 26, 2017. But if you look at the transcript here from Apollo 11, they were doing some navigating with these serpents. And yeah, Jordan, do you want to read that real quick?
Sure. Duke. Negative. We have all the throttle data we need. You can stay low bitrate. You can proceed through the throttle test, but do not do the gimbal trim. Over. Repeat, do not do the gimbal trim. Armstrong. Roger, understand. Collins. Boy, you just can't miss those checkpoints. Diamondback and Sidewinder. Collins. Auto optics are pointed just a little bit north of crater 130. Duke. Roger, copy. Columbia, out. Yeah.
All right. So that gives a little bit of a flavor of the conversation there. So I looked, I was like, where are these sinuous rows, these serpents that are on the moon? Well, wouldn't you know it? Wouldn't you know it? They are right on the edge of Mare Tranquillatis, right? They are right on the edge of the Sea of Tranquility, right? And, given some of the reasoning that we've done earlier, the Sea of Tranquility seems to be this interchangeable mythologem, right, with the Garden of Eden, right? And so, of course, that's where the serpents would be. And I believe they are west and southwest of this crater called Masculine. Okay, I could be saying that incorrectly. I think from what I was able to deduce, where the arrow is pointing is where they are, but I couldn't zoom in on them enough to find out if that was in fact the case. And I mentioned earlier, when you get into Aeon, and I do not understand it yet, there are these quaternities, okay? And the serpent is it's beyond just like, ooh, serpent tells lies, serpent bad. It's beyond that. The way that Jung is seeing it is that there are like different aspects to these symbols, right? And the serpent, as Mercurius, can also, it can be the devil, but it can also, we look at this very elaborate quaternity over here, and I'm not prepared to break down how to do all this yet. But you can also see that the serpent is connected with Christ. And this is a really crazy thing. When you read the Old Testament, there's some confusing things that I will say that this form of archetypal interpretation does resolve. I think it's in Exodus. I don't know, but there is a story where Yahweh gets angry with the Israelites and he sends these like fiery serpents upon them. I think I have this story right. Someone might have to fact check me on this. And they're afflicting the Israelites, and to get it to stop and to heal their wounds, I believe Moses raises up a bronze serpent on a pole, and this puts it to rest. And this is so interesting, right? Because we clearly have like the serpent that is like responsible for the fall in the Garden of Eden, but we also have this serpent as this being raised up to cure the individuals that are afflicted by the serpents that God has sent. It is foreshadowing Christ in a way, right? Because thing like Christ is like raised up on a pole and takes on the sins of all humanity. Like this when you start getting into the details of the Bible and you see stuff like this, like it really does explode your understanding of what's happening there. And I think, at least with what Jung is doing, that this is a potentially effective way to address some of these, wow, I didn't learn that in Sunday school moments.
Yeah, I mean, enter an explosion of various Gnostic interpretations of these symbols because it is
Right.
confusing to
Right.
people because in a more binary, I'd say narrow sense, it's like, well, is the serpent good or bad? And it's
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways to address
It's
that, but it seems like these things are bigger than good or bad. And
for Jung, it's essential. It's
exactly.
essential to get the
Which
process
is
going.
exactly what we talked about earlier with the revelation of the method. It's a technology in a way that has the capacity to both bring people through a fall experience, but also it has the potential to raise people back up.
Right. And this gets in the, people always go, well, why, why did God even put Adam and Eve in this scenario? Right? Why did he even allow the serpent to be there to beguile them and fool them? And it's like, well, this, when you understand this psychologically, then a lot of those theodicy questions perhaps go away. I'm not saying that it doesn't present its own issues, but you can see the utility of this idea. Yeah.
I
All
mean,
right, what do we got next
is
on
this
deck here?
Oh,
is this
We
the
got more
origin of,
snakes.
hospitals having this serpent on a scepter?
So that kind of gets into our discussion about
mhm.
Mercury. Oh, did I lose my slides? I'm stuck at 469.
Um, I mean, I can see it.
Do you have more? Do you have the next slide?
Yeah.
Can you go 470? I need to reboot my
Okay.
slides because I'm stuck.
Yeah, you're out of RAM.
I am so angry at my computer right
It's
now.
okay. Something that occurred to me is Sandy the squirrel in SpongeBob is part of this whole thing too. She is a Texan. So we're talking I mean, there's a huge kind of like the mythos of the West, the Texan kind of runs through a lot of these things. A primary example being in Doctor Strangelove. I think his name's Tex, just it's a very particular archetype and it is played up, though, I do know people who talk like that. But Sandy the squirrel, she dresses like an astronaut, but she's underwater.
Oh
So
yeah.
we have the water, the ocean, but she looks like a moonwalker. And she's the squirrel, the trickster.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And it's
That's really
also
interesting.
in a bikini bottom. So the bikini bottom is where nuclear tests were held. It's again tying back
I
both
totally
events.
forgot. That's an excellent observation. I love it.
Right. And the whole, like, they were doing those nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll, right? And so it brings in this conversation about a sexual dimension to the technology. It's
And
wild.
she's one of the main feminine characters, so she's kind of bringing that moon watery, yeah. That's fun.
All right, let's go to slide 470.
We're there.
Okay. I'm sorry
It's
about
okay.
this. I've got more reading for you. I don't know. I've done this slide before. I realized that the quotes there were hallucinations, and I had to scramble to find one that said essentially the same thing. It's longer, but why don't you read that one for us, Jordan?
Sure. When the alchemist speaks of Mercurius, on the face of it, he means quicksilver, Mercury. But inwardly, he means the world creating spirit concealed or imprisoned in matter. The dragon is probably the oldest pictorial symbol in alchemy of which we have documentary evidence. It appears as the Ouroboros, the tail eater, in the Codex Marcianus, which dates from the 10th or 11th century, together with the legend, the One, the All. Time and again, the alchemists reiterates that the opus proceeds from the One and leads back to the One, that it is a sort of circle like a dragon biting its own tail. For this reason, the opus was often called circular, or else rota, the wheel. Mercurius stands at the beginning and end of the work. He is the prima materia, the capu corvi, the nigredo. As dragon, he devours himself, and as dragon, he dies to rise again in the lapis. He is the play of colors in the cauda pavonis and the vision into the four elements. He is the hermaphrodite that was in the beginning that splits into the classical brother sister duality and is reunited in the coniontio to appear once again at the end in the radiant form of the lumen novum, the stone. He is metallic yet liquid, matter yet spirit, cold yet fiery, poison and yet healing drought, a symbol uniting
Mm-hmm.
all the opposites. This is a badass quote and much better than the hallucinated one.
Yeah. Yeah, much better. The other ones were a little too concise, and there's so much to break down here. And I don't know. how much I want to say. But yeah, it kind of just brings a lot of these things together. I want to get more. I want to do a little follow up research on him analogizing Mercurius to the divine hermaphrodite. Of course, we've seen the dragon uh, at the foot of the divine hermaphrodite. So it seems a little bit different, like interpreting the entire thing as Mercurius rather than an aspect of it. But yeah, there's a lot to break down here. I think this is going to be a quote we return to often, but I wanted to establish that we do, in fact, have Mercurius as this Ouroboros. But I do want to get into Ostic's question about the staff and the serpents. I believe the staff, there are usually two different types of staffs that are associated with medicine, right? There's the caduceus, which I think there's a whole story about how that comes from Asclepius. Is that right? But there is a
Yeah.
very similar staff that Mercury has. But I wanted to apply some of these insights that we've had on Mercurius and Hermes, and it's going to connect to this staff. So we are on, okay, this is Alan Shepard. Okay. This is trippy. All right. This is Alan Shepard. Alan Shepard was the first American in space. Okay. And he also was part of Apollo 14. We've talked about him before in relation to like Edgar Mitchell and Alan Shepard and Edgar Allan and bringing in the Poe and whatnot. Okay. So in regards to Mercurius and Shepard, he is he's a shepherd. He is a psychopomp. Mercurius is also the god of shepherds, right? So it makes sense that a man who is transgressing a boundary, like bringing us into space and then again walking on the moon, right, would be connected to Hermes or to Mercury. Not to mention that the game of golf was invented, so it is believed, by shepherds, right? And this guy, he made this like special golf club that he smuggled aboard Apollo 14 to hit two balls, right? And Jordan's heard me talk about this before, that I think this is an allusion um, to a Masonic figure known as Tubal Cain, right? Two Balls Cain, right? Who is also a hybridization, I found out, of Thoth and Hermes Trismegistus. Or I'm sorry. Tubal Cain is another name for Hermes Trismegistus, which is a synthesis or a hybrid of Hermes and Thoth. In regards to the wand, something that I learned, and you can see this over here on the quote that I have here from the Odyssey, is that Hermes was able to wake and put people asleep with this wand. So I find it so interesting that Alan Shepard, who was part of the Mercury program, had this staff that he took on the moon. It's in Homer's Odyssey. He says, and he, Hermes, took the rod that lulls men's eyes for him at his pleasure, or awakens others when they slumber, right? So this is kind of the idea of there being a dark and a light aspect to Hermes, right? Not to mention, I've said this before, there seems to be something like a spacesuit associated with Hermes, with the winged helmet, the winged boots, and whatever the astronauts wear. And I found this out, that Hermes was the god of athletes. So in a weird kind of 2-for-1 thing, right? He's got his staff. I mean, he's actually playing he's doing something athletic on the moon by playing this golf game. And interestingly enough, some other things that are associated with Alan Shepard is that uh, there's this period where he was grounded. He had like an inner ear imbalance called Meniere's disease. So in a way, he's kind of like this banished psychopomp between 1961 and then coming back for Apollo 14. It was kind of like he was in the underworld and then was able to ascend into the heavens again, much like kind of mirroring a mercurial sort of story. And then something else I thought that was interesting about this is that in early Christianity, I've found that Paul and Jesus were often associated with Mercury. This whole like the shepherd, right? Like the whole this good shepherd. People call Jesus the good shepherd. And Jung has this quote to say about this. The unconscious is the universal mediator among men. It is, in a sense, the all embracing one, or the one psychic substratum common to all. The alchemists knew it as their Mercurius, and they called him the mediator in analogy to Christ. Ecclesiastical doctrine says the same thing about Christ, and so particularly does our hymn. So there's this kind of this examination of Mercurius and it being kind of tagging Alan Shepard also kind of gets us back into the Garden of Eden story, not only with like the serpent like tail, but because Alan Shepard like comes back to the moon. Like they're on the Sea of Tranquility. They go to the Ocean of Storms. Things get a little crazy. The television signal goes out. Then Apollo 13 happens, right? And there's this like movement into the Aquarian age, and things are really disruptive. They have the catastrophe, right? And then the shepherd reappears, right? How about like and I just I don't know. It seems like there are like narratives within narratives where you have this Garden of Eden, where you have this fall situation almost play out again on the moon and through the different capsules, and then the shepherd reappears. I don't know if this is going to tell us like there's like if there's like a narrative that's going to continue all the way to Apollo 17 here, but it seems like it might, given the way that I've kind of portrayed it. So I don't know what to say. Like there's like biblical narratives and alchemical stories like going on at different levels. It's like happening on the moon, it's happening in the capsules, it's happening with the major events, the Trinity and the Apollo. It's like telescoping in a way. So those are some of the interesting things. One of the other things I'll say is um, because I got to thinking about the golf thing, get an eagle is like a golf term. And I believe there is something known as a double eagle in golf, which also has another name, is like it's called an albatross. So that might be there might be more golf references here beyond Apollo 14. There might be a golf reference in Apollo 11. And if there's one in Apollo 11, there might be just everywhere. I mean, it even kind of looks like it, right? He's like planting the flag so you can, all right, I'm going off the rails here. But look at this. Isn't this interesting?
It is. It reminds me of Mount Rainier in Washington State, where the previous owners of the mountain built a golf course on top of it. And now that's where they have the like public, what do you call it? Like parks and recreation facilities. So people can like use it as a base camp. And there's a spa there and all these things. But the idea of them probably blowing up parts of the mountain. And when you spend a lot of time out there at high altitudes, it looks like the moon. The surface of it is very moon-esque. So I don't know, just another fractal of the golfing on the moon.
To really get even deeper into this whole Mercurius thing, we're going to have to look at this specific chapter from Alchemical Studies, The Spirit Mercurius. And yeah, I mean, this is a pretty frightening alchemical diagram that he included in it. I mean, it has a lot of the same features that we've looked at with the more, I guess, mainstream alchemical images, right? Where we've seen the dragon at the feet of the divine hermaphrodite or whatever. But you can see here, like it's kind of like a total entity, right? And you see the sun and the moon, and then they merge together in order to form Mercury over there. So I just thought it was interesting. We can go to the next slide. Okay, finally, I get to talk about monkeys. So I've been meaning to do this. It is not the case that in Greek or Roman mythology that monkeys are associated with Mercurius, though they are tricksters like Mercurius is. You could even possibly make this distinction that somehow they were like a lower layer of this trickster archetype, but that's a whole other conversation, type of psychic ancestor. Um, what I wanted to do here is just, I thought it was very interesting, when you have this Mercury program and then you have these two biblically named chimps that go into outer space. The first one was Ham was he went to outer space on January 31st, 1961, and Enos shortly thereafter, I think a year later, became the first primate to orbit Earth. I just wanted to play with some of the symbolism here. There's a lot going on with Ham. Both of these are biblical names. Ham and Enos you can find in the book of Genesis. So I would say that this is possibly a piece of evidence that instantiates the Garden of Eden story and the events of Genesis even more so within the Apollo moon missions. We talk about the reading of Genesis 8 during Apollo 8, and we talk about the Genesis rock and a variety of other issues that we've talked about. But Ham, interestingly enough, was like the cursed son of Noah. And there's a lot that could be said about this in terms of, possibly viewing the rockets as arcs, but then, the nature of the endeavor is a kind of a bad omen. It's very interesting that they chose that name for that monkey. And then Enos was an ancestor of Noah and Jesus. So, one of the things we looked at before was this image of Ham receiving an apple after he splashed down, and the symbolism involved, like, what's going on here. This kind of gets further into the Garden of Eden narrative. Supposedly the spacesuits that they use for Mercury were like, there's like a scientific reason they painted them all silver, but I mean, I think this is like clearly calling our attention to the alchemical process that we find ourselves caught up in, Mercury or Quicksilver there. And one thing that I thought was interesting about these rockets that they used during the Mercury program, the one that Ham was on was a Mercury Redstone rocket. Same deal with Alan Shepard. I think he was on a Redstone rocket. And we've talked about these different stages of the alchemical process. And one of them is the reddening or rubedo. And the fact that Mercury is combined with this red stone or this, and that there's a shepherd on top of it going into outer space seems to me to be highly alchemical. I had a little bit, it got kind of late in the day. So I think I started to use a little bit more of my summarization technology to get some of this stuff out here. But I think what this is all pointing to is that these moon missions are ultimately going to be involved in producing the Philosopher's Stone. And as far as I can tell, I don't want to spoil it too much, but the Philosopher's Stone is going to be this overview effect, this cosmic consciousness that united all the world in a new perspective. I think that's ultimately like the cash output of all this. If we can go to a slide 474.
Not to delay, but
Yeah.
I imagine you have something to say about the names of all of the rockets in succession. It's super
I,
interesting to me. Like, is that part
I,
of the alchemical
I,
journey?
I think it probably is. I hadn't gotten to that yet. I'm going to make a note of that.
Yeah. Just seeing it laid out here,
Yeah, I missed it.
all good. And then 7, they don't always maintain the same numbers when they do repeated projects. I imagine it's the number of people, right? But having the continuity of that.
Yeah, I have I had intended to look at the numinosity of the number 7, and I just didn't get to it this time. But yeah, freedom, Liberty Bell, friendship, Aurora, Sigma, faith. I mean, and there's even within that, they name their capsules different things, right? Like, I haven't really had a chance to think about this. Gus almost drowned during the Mercury
Mhm.
program. I forget I think it may have been Friendship 7. I have to go back and check my notes, but he almost drowned, and then he got like another capsule that they nicknamed the Unsinkable Molly Brown, and that's a reference to Titanic. So
Mm,
that it's this other like mythologium that gets introduced into the program,
mhm.
and so he almost has this watery grave, but he ends up dying in fire. So I haven't. There's something alchemical happening there, but I haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah, well, and then the word united, what does united really mean? Are we talking about the integration of opposites? Of course, all these names, freedom, Liberty Bell, a lot of this really goes back into the American mythos, as does the word
Yeah.
united. Those things are used frequently, but maybe this is something we circle back around to.
Yeah, they seem on the face of it, they seem slightly less occult than the other ones. The one that catches my attention is Aurora 7, right?
Mhm.
Because then, but and the fact that they named one Faith is very intriguing to me.
Yes, that's what piqued my curiosity initially because we have almost this cycle of yeah, faith to me seems like a later stage where you have to, as we've been talking about, let go of the mental to access the next level. And then also, I
Yeah.
mean, where else are you seeing freedom right now? Freedom to me is very occult. There are lots of different angles to it. And not to say I'm not trying to say like freedom is a bad concept. Autonomy is a super big
Mhm.
value of mine. But currently, what are we seeing? We're seeing the white t shirt with the black freedom text.
That's
So
interesting.
I do think it's used in a way, or at least it's one of these
Ooh, that's
fractals.
very interesting. To keep that in mind for the next slide, and I'm glad you wanted to dwell on the slide a little bit more. Something I'm starting because we kind of are going over some of the same things over and over. Like I'm able to like things are like falling into place that like I missed before. So like in the next couple slides, I'm gonna be dwelling on color. Like
Mm.
I've seen these rockets a million times, right? But I haven't like thought about the color and
You have the black white.
yes, there we go. See, you're seeing it now that I'm directing your attention to it. Like, and like, I think in my mind, I was like, oh, that's just like duality. Like, that's something like, Illuminati or something like that. Well, if you have the light and the dark, right? And this is like the tension of the opposites that we've been talking about as far as Mercurius goes.
Mhm.
Not to mention it, I mean, it does have there is like a Masonic dimension to this as well, where they see the entire world as composed of these elements, like tessellated pavement or something like that. Not that I think that this is necessarily a Masonic call sign. It's just there is an alchemical tinge to that as well.
Right, they're aware of this layer of reality, I think is how I would describe it.
Maybe I don't
Maybe
know.
well, just the basic symbolism of the checkerboard,
Yeah,
I think that's really all I mean. I don't mean like
yeah,
every single
yeah,
person is fully
yeah,
briefed on
yeah,
everything. I don't even know it
yeah,
all.
yeah. Well, even the red tip of the
Yep.
Mercury rockets as well, I think is interesting. But if we go to the next slide, I can talk a little bit more about colors. So this has been like in front of my face the entire time. We've talked about the rebus and we've talked about the marriage of sun and moon. Like this goes all the way back to our discussion of why is the moon landing named after a, a, a sun god, right? And this has led us to get into this picture language of alchemy with the red king and the white queen. And these correspond to different stages in alchemy. I've already mentioned the ribetto, but also the albedo um, is associated with the moon. So you see with the classic meatball logo of NASA, we see red and white. So we have two, it seems that we have the two alchemical stages referred to there. I'm not saying anyone intentionally did that. I'm saying this is like the something is working through people. And they kept this idea with the worm logo as well. It's red and white, which, like I said, connects back to the alchemical marriage, to the red king and the white queen coming together. Like we've never really talked about the colors. Now I'm like, what else am I missing? Like I didn't think about the black and white tessellation. I didn't think about this. Like, how am I'm just gonna keep it. It seems unlimited, like what we can wring out and pull from.
I think that's true. The longer
Yeah,
we sit with them, the more layers of it. But yeah, color is a
yeah.
huge deal. The frequency of colors, they have an emotional reaction that they get from people. I mean, this is well known. This isn't occulted knowledge.
It makes me want to like dig deeper into the blue background that the red and the white are against here with the meatball logo and these
Mhm.
constellations. Like, I just haven't gotten there yet. I mean, do you have any ideas?
Well, when we go to the photo of the 7 of them, they intentionally put them in front of the blue backgrounds. They have sort of a
They
red
do. They do.
bench.
That's mm,
Now, whether this is just a brand marketer being consistent,
mm.
right, with the brand guidelines, I don't that would be one way of looking at it. So, that could be happening without this photo in particular being super intentional, but it's there as well. And it looks
It
like the
is.
sky, right? Like, when we look back at the rockets themselves, the blue background with the red in front of it does seem to mirror exactly this, and, in a basic
That's
way
right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
this is
That's
the
right.
sky, right? They're
It
saying the
is.
background is
Yes.
the sky, the red is maybe the rocket, right? Um, or maybe not,
Well, you see, yeah, yeah, in the rebus that's up there in the top right hand corner, you see that it also has like the planets behind it as well. So maybe
Mhm.
these constellations could connect to that too.
And in a more graphic sense, you have,
The
like,
seven too. There's seven of them. Look
eh
at that.
interesting.
Yeah. See, that's going to tell us why the Mercury 7 number is so numinous. It's going to be connecting to these planets.
Mhm.
I'd be willing to bet money.
That makes sense. Also, you have the intercourse imagery here of the, like, red penetrating the as we talk about the moon missions being symbolic of this union of
Mhm.
masculine and feminine. I mean, that's exactly what do 7th graders do with their hands as a dirty joke? Like,
Right.
that's exactly what this looks like.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, totally, it does. I mean, it does kinda look like a sexual hieroglyphic, right?
Mhm.
You have, right, the receptive white queen, right, and the red chevron of the red
Right.
king.
Right.
There you
Like, you
go.
have the moon craters and you know,
Yeah,
on and on and on. I'm sure we'll be
yeah,
given more layers as time goes on.
good call, good call. I wanted to pause to do a little bit of a technical clarification, because, you know, I'm teaching myself how to do all of this stuff, and oftentimes I'll just break down with like chat gpt and be like, am I doing this all wrong? Is there any precedent for this, right, to do sort of a archetypal history of the apollo programs? And I wanted to introduce a new term that we've not talked about so far, um, and that term is amplification. So amplification is a symbolic method of interpretation in which an image, whether from a dream, myth, or historical event, is expanded through comparison with related motifs drawn from religion, art, folklore, and cultural history. Rather than reducing a symbol to a fixed meaning, amplification multiplies its resonances, allowing the psyche's archetypal patterns to reveal themselves through analogy and association. As Jung explains, amplification is a process of comparison that seeks to place the image in the widest possible context. The goal is not factual explanation, but the discovery of the deeper psychic truth a symbol embodies, its participation in the collective unconscious, the storehouse of humanity's universal images and myths. Now, when Jung was doing this, he was primarily doing it in a clinical setting, although we have examples like the Votan essay, where he was looking at archetypes in history, specifically Hitler being possessed by the Votan archetype. Other scions and disciples of Jung have taken this idea of archetypal history more seriously. Some of them I have here on the slide, specifically Eric Neumann's Origins and History of Consciousness, Edward Edinger's The Eternal Drama or the Christian Archetype, von Franz's interpretation of fairy tales, shadow and evil in fairy tales. And the one that seems to be the one that's most in my wheelhouse and that I'm going to have to spend some considerable time with is James Hillman's Archetypal Psychology. And of course, there's Fanny Brewster's The Racial Complex. Not surprised that my research would lead me to conclude that James Hillman would be a kindred spirit in this. I've shared with you in our group chat some of his insights from this Jungian documentary that's on YouTube, which I highly recommend everyone check out, called The Wisdom of the Dream. And I just finished the third installment of it. And I think it was made in the 70s or 80s. And in that program, he's like, oh yeah, like a myth is something that you don't know that you're in, right? And technology is our modern myth. And I was like, holy smokes. I have been saying that independently of my interest in Jung for about a decade. And it seems that Hillman at least beat me to it. So I do not think that he is interested in interpreting outer space and missions and things like that in terms of archetypal history. I think if I have this correct, I think he was interested more in war. I think he was doing a lot of interpretation of war in regards to like the Aries archetype, but don't quote me on that. I have to go deeper into it. So I just thought this was interesting and wanted to share where some of my research will be going in the future.
That's fun. I like that.
Yeah. And of course, looking for people to guide me along the way, I'm like, look, did they all these individuals I have on this card? I was like talking to chat. I was like, did they like develop some rules of the road? Right. And they kind of did. There's kind of like a consensus for how you do what I'm doing. And I wanted to potentially get into some reflection about whether or not we've been doing it this entire time in the seminar. But when Jung was doing it, he was very interested in avoiding reductionism and always was emphasizing the importance of the collective shadow. James Hillman established the principles of to focus on the image, maintain complexity, and avoid literalism. Eric Neumann was always about the primacy of historical context and systemic rigor. And Edinger was about transparency and clarity. And if we go to the next slide, Jordan, what does that look like, right? Like, what is the right way to do this? So, in regards to plausibility and insight, it ought to be coherent, internally consistent, and adds depth and nuance. It resonates with readers and provides an aha moment. I would have to say that's something that happens a lot with what we do here. I would say that is kind of one of the things that I've let lead me the most, I think. Conversely, if it's not plausible, doesn't really offer insight, or it ignores and distorts things, like you're trying to twist things to fit the narrative, I think this is pretty problematic. You might want to go to the next slide, by the way, on the screen. Sorry. As far as methodological integrity, it's got to be supported by evidence and amplification, parallels in mythology and literature, avoids dogma, and is transparent about biases and interpretive limits. I think there's been a lot of humility in what we've done here. So I feel pretty confident about that. It ought to be ethical and rigorous, enriches understanding rather than reducing it, treats historical material with respect, and avoids promoting stereotypes. I think this is what probably the one that I have, if I'm to be honest, I've struggled with it the most, probably from whatever this means. And I have to say, a lot of these criteria are still pretty nebulous. Like, I got into this sort of research from a conspiracy angle, and I have a feeling that that would not be uh, received as an appropriate coloring of the events here. So I have to think about this as I put together this book, how to, I think there's a lot of really wonderful insights in like conspiracy critique, but like how to talk about it in such a way that it doesn't do violence to the larger interpretation. And I've thought about some like organizational ways that that could be done. Because really, I think I kind of understand like conspiracy is like part of like kind of neglected history. It's just a darker aspect of the historical stream. So maybe that could be better. And I mean, a big part of this here is validation through consensus. It's going to need a lot of peer review and discussion. And I think that's what's been really great about testing a lot of the ideas out here on YouTube. I mean, at least with the three of us, I feel like there's a good rapport, and whoever else we bring into the conversation. But it does raise interesting questions about like how do you get peer review with this sort of project that we're talking about here? And I've played around with the idea of like perhaps starting like a print journal or something like that. But how do you, when you're kind of dealing with something that's potentially groundbreaking, how do you like how do you have that consensus? I mean, you're going to be an outlier for a while. And a lot of people who do like Jungian analysis are not going to be receptive to a lot of these ideas. So what do you think? How are we passing?
I mean, I think it's just an open conversation. What really is peer review? I don't think it necessarily has to be in the format that you see in academia, but I think it's just opening up the conversation. But not a single one of us has the whole puzzle. So we have to kind of work together to piece it together.
Yeah. Mm.
Mm.
Okay. All right. Let's go to slide 478. I think we're going to dive back into this Philosopher's Stone thing. All right. Why don't you read that passage for me?
Of course. All these statements apply just as well to the prima materia in its feminine aspect. It is the moon, the mother of all things, the vessel. It consists of opposites, has 1,000 names, is an old woman and a whore. As matter alchemia, it is wisdom and teaches wisdom. It contains the elixir of life in potentia and is the mother of the Savior and of the filius macrocosmi. It is the earth and the serpent hidden in the earth, the blackness and the dew, and the miraculous water which brings together all that is divided. The water is therefore called Mother, my mother who is my enemy, but who also gathers together all my divided and scattered limbs.
There we go. All right. So this struck when I was listening to this, it's from Mysterium Conjunctionis. When I was listening to this the other day, I was like, okay, cool. Like this is a great passage because like Jung is finally drawing this tighter that the moon and the mother are connected. And like, there's a lot of context that has to go on here. The thing that this is going to get into the conversation of the Philosopher's Stone, and there's a lot to unpack in this passage. The thing that kind of caught my attention was this line: it contains the elixir of life in potentia and is the mother of the Savior and of the filius macrocosmi. I was like, what is that? So I'll lean on this a little bit, and we're going to get into a conversation about the filius macrocosmi and the filius microcosmi. So in Mysterium Conjunctionis, Carl Jung interprets the prima materia, the alchemist's first matter, is a profound symbol of the unconscious psyche, the raw substrate from which all psychological transformation arises. He emphasizes its paradoxical and feminine nature. At once the mother, moon, vessel, and the old woman or whore, it embodies both the lowest and highest aspects of being. This duality mirrors the unconscious itself, chaotic, dark, and destructive, yet the hidden source of wisdom and renewal. The prima materia's thousand names reveal its ubiquity and indefinability. It is the psychic totality prior to differentiation, containing the shadow and the seed of the self alike. Though seemingly impure, it holds within it the elixir of life and potentia, the potential for rebirth and spiritual integration. Psychologically, this substance is both my mother and my enemy, the unconscious as the source of inner conflict and healing. The miraculous water that gathers together all my divided and scattered limbs symbolizes the process of individuation, where the psyche's opposites, light and dark, masculine and feminine, spirit and matter, are reconciled into wholeness. From this prima materia is born the filius macrocosmi, the savior or self, uniting the microcosmic, the individual, and macrocosmic, universal dimensions of existence. Jung's reading reveals that the path to psychic wholeness begins not in transcendence, but in confrontation with what is most base and contradictory within us. The alchemical opus thus mirrors the inner work of integration, the transformation of the unconscious first matter into the radiant unity of the philosopher's stone, the realized fully conscious self. So I've got a little chart here on page 479. We can just go off the card here. The filius microcosmi is associated with the Son of Man. And I guess this is where Jung's talk about Christ as the image of the self is relevant. And it is something that saves the human soul. This image of the self is this integrating center. But as the filius macrocosmi, the son of the world, this is a reference to the philosopher's stone and Mercurius. This is going to, I guess, save the entire world. And it's largely a spiritual and material matter. So it's the realization of the self as a universal cosmic principle that connects all things. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is like, it seems like there is the alchemical work that one undergoes individually, but then perhaps these world historical events, if I understand this correctly, and it's quite possible I have this wrong, are like similar, but like written out in objective reality in some way. And we've talked about the alchemical stages a little bit here. They're reduced to three here. These are because sometimes they're condensed, whereas the yellowness one, I believe, will sometimes come after albedo. But you have the negretto, the albedo, citrinitas or yellowness. That's the solar dawn or awakening, and then the rubedo. So, the rubedo stage entails the attempt of the alchemist to integrate the psycho-spiritual outcomes of the process into a coherent sense of self before its reentry to the world. We can go to slide 489 here. I've got a lot of writing, and I don't know how helpful it is to just read off the card here. But I've got the steps outlined here and some of the images that they're associated with, and we've talked about this. The negretto and the blackening can be associated with the raven or crow. The albedo, we've talked about it with the dove, swan, or white queen. Citrinitas is associated with the wise old man archetype, and the rubedo, as we've talked about with the red king, it can also be associated with the phoenix or red lion. So these are the processes. We'll go deeper into it at some point. I think we should just close here with this final thing. on slide 42.
Okay.
Do you want to say something about all the
Um,
alchemical stages? I'm sorry.
I mean, there's so much
There,
here.
there's so much here. I guess, to be honest, I don't have as great a handle on it as I'd like to without reading off the script. I think for right now, we have the terms
Mhm.
and we know roughly what they correspond to. I would say that my understanding of it is that this cosmic consciousness that the moon landings provided may ultimately be identifiable with the philosopher's stone.
Mhm.
But there's like things I need to work through still here. Like the blackening, the Negretto stuff, like that could potentially be connected to the Trinity explosion, but it also could be associated with the traversing of outer space.
Mm. Mhm.
You know, and I'm not exactly sure where the citrinatus or the yellowing or the where that fits in. I mean, perhaps that the solar dawn. I mean, maybe I'm trying. It's like the Apollo stuff. Is that connected to this stage or to the Ribetto stage? I haven't figured it out yet.
Well, in the Ribetto stage, it feels relevant to all of these, "Oh, we're going to Mars. Let's go to Mars."
Right, right.
We had the Mars
That's
rover,
interesting.
you know?
That's interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, we'll all sit with it a little bit more, but I could see a few different ways these play out. I'm kinda with you. Like, I'm not totally locked in yet to what I think these stages truly are. I think it is maybe enough to offer this framework and then see what comes of it. But it's interesting. And I mean, yeah, I'll stop there because I could totally speculate.
Yeah, I need to do some more work on it,
Yeah,
but the conversation has been broached. This is where we're getting. I mean, I really need to spend some time with the Rosarian Philosophorum, and
which is crazy.
yeah,
The
yeah.
imagery here, I will say, is so beautiful. The other day, I came
Mhm.
across these images of some old light bulbs where they created in the is it the filament? I don't know, but they like made flowers inside the light bulb. So when you light up the light bulb, it's like it looks like a garden inside. It looked very similar to these, but these are super interesting.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. So, and lastly here, this is kind of a throwaway thing that not a throwaway, but like I kind of tacked it on at the end. I forgot to mention this, or I rediscovered it this morning. Um, and it kind of fits in with some of the other things that we're talking about.
Mhm.
But there is a feature on the moon named Mount Marilyn. And I guess Jim Lavelle named it after his wife. And it why this is interesting is because like it kind of puts another. We've talked about like Marilyn Monroe's association with the moon through the Playboy bunnies
We also have
and the Yankee
Mary.
Clipper.
Mary is in
Right,
there.
right, exactly. All the C's, and then so now there is like, and Marilyn is like derivative of the name Mary. What I thought was like so interesting about this is, according to Wikipedia, Mount Maryland is a lunar mountain within the Morte Secche or whatever, which separate Mare Fecunditatis to the east from Mare Tranquillitatis, which is like, okay, like that's like I can't even say the word fecunditatis. Like that's with fecundity. That's like procreative power, right? And associated with the tranquility. Like so it's associated with like giving birth, right? And I find that to be really interesting. Um, and then the only other thing I wanted to point out here was I've yet to figure out where all the astronauts, these 12 moonwalkers, like match up with these archetypes. And I think there might be reason to think about Neil Armstrong being the child or innocent archetype, given that he's kind of like this he's kind of recapitulating the first man in the garden scenario. So that's something I want to explore in the future. But I'm not committed to it.
Yeah. Well, you're getting to some very
Mhm.
deep stuff as I mean, the young you're getting into now, I think it's
Yeah.
completely understandable that it's gonna take a little bit to synthesize it.
Yeah, I need more than 3 hours sleep to do this justice, so I have to come back to it. But I'm glad we got it done.
Yeah.
Oh, so it's a brisk 2-hour podcast today.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's sufficient.
Okay.
Anything else you wanna include here?
No, that's it. I'm
Okay.
I'm glad we got it done,
Yeah.
despite time changes and everything.
Well, until next time.
All right, thank you.